Unity, declared by the Scriptures as the divine intention of God's creation, is the mission of the Church of Jesus Christ. Sin comes to divide, disrupting the primal unity of God's creation, bringing with it enmity, alienation, separation, apartness. This is onverwacht, one more squalid monument to apartheid, a legacy that divides humankind and, discriminating on a basis of skin color, classifies, uproots, and condemns millions of God's people to a dehumanized existence in Bantustan resettlement camps. In pursuing God's intention, the South African Council of Churches condemns apartheid as sinful, unjust, and unchristian. General Secretary Bishop Desmond Tutu.
The Church has consistently said that apartheid is totally inconsistent with the gospel of Jesus Christ. That you cannot be a Christian and at the same time be a perpetrator of apartheid. If the Church follows in the footsteps of its Lord and Master and descends into the veil of human need, suffering and misunderstanding, if the Church identifies with the poor, the hungry, the homeless, the unemployed, the voteless, the uprooted and dumped ones, the evicted ones, the disqualified ones, those who are daily endorsed out of cities, if the Church speaks up on their behalf, then the Church must suffer. And perhaps the Church must die. This Church must finally challenge apartheid, which claims that human beings are made for separation, totally denying the work that Jesus accomplished of at-one-ment between God and us and amongst ourselves. If the Church suffers and dies for the sake of Christ and the gospel, why, it should not be surprised. Its Lord and Master said, in truth, in very truth, I tell you, a grain of wheat remains a solitary grain unless it falls into the ground and dies. But if it dies, it bears a rich harvest. Hey, this is God's world, and there is nothing, absolutely nothing, that can prevail against God's church.
At Godse House, the House of Peace, headquarters of the South African Council of Churches, staff and members of the Executive Committee attend a morning Eucharist led by the Reverend Winston Ndungane.
The law of apartheid brings about an institutionalized injustice which results in a denial of fundamental human rights to the black population of South Africa. It is in this context that the Church is called to proclaim the Word of God, which is about God's love, God's truth, and God's justice.
Let us pray at this Eucharist for the Church of God in this land, that the Church may be a living witness to the unity which is God's gift to us, that precious unity which overcomes all the divisions we erect between men and women, denominations, races, nations. Let us pray for this council, that we may help forward the unity of the churches and of all mankind.
An instrument of Christian unity, the South African Council of Churches is a fellowship of people from different denominations who confess Jesus Christ. It provides a link between the many churches in South Africa and between the South African Church and the World Church. As a servant of the churches in the racially polarized society that is South Africa, it must be an instrument of reconciliation. As a council of the churches, it is concerned for the extension of the kingdom of God, and to help the churches in this task has a division of mission and evangelism.
The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
The role of the council is not to duplicate the work of the churches, but to stimulate discussion and facilitate coordination through workshops and seminars, bringing together the individual churches in cooperative efforts.
Jesus said, "In very truth I tell you, if anyone obeys my teaching, he shall never know what it is to die."
The division of mission and evangelism is concerned with all that is central to the evangelistic effort of the individual church at the congregational level. Sunday school work, Bible classes, preaching, the unity of that church with other churches, whatever problems a preacher may encounter in ministering to his community. Out of the family situation, Christ's ministry arose. By his very birth and first miracle performed at a wedding feast, he sanctified marriage and the family unit as a precious nucleus of Christian society.
Blessings on the meal.
The division of home and family life has as its basic concern the realization of God's institution, the family unit, to provide for the rearing and care of young children and the protection of adult members of the community. While health education is an important part of its work, the division is largely concerned with arranging seminars and conferences, holding courses and publishing literature to stimulate discussion and awareness aimed at assisting the Christian community in discovering the potential richness and meaning of the family and its importance as the cornerstone of society.
Your wings and tell the story, how he rose the King of glory. From my head to my feet, I am the image of God. From my heart to my hands, I feel the breath of God. When I speak with my mouth, I follow God's will.
Now, Mina, my idea is of letting down.
Though its activities are widespread, the division is chiefly concerned with creating an awareness of the woman's role in society and confronting those issues that lead to family breakdown.
But I think what is important is to recognize...
The commitment of the council is best reflected in the personal involvement of its staff members in serving the community in their everyday lives.
Come up together. Mr. and Mrs. Z.
Bernadette Masala, a high school teacher of 17 years standing, left the profession because of the harmful shortcomings imposed on teachers and students with the implementation of Bantu education.
But each for himself and herself. I would like us all to handle that one first.
These people are...
Bernadette is the director of the Division of Home and Family Life. At the weekend, she is involved in marriage counseling and conducts regular marriage task forces. At these meetings, married couples are brought together in small groups and are guided in recognizing and confronting those everyday issues in their lives that lead to marriage and family breakdown.
So the only solution...
To provide a form of compensatory education, Bernadette holds revision classes in the evenings for matric students in Soweto.
And then we forget the Christian dimension of marriage, that in St. Paul's, is it Galatians or Ephesians, I'm not sure, where St. Paul says, through Jesus Christ's blood, there is no male, no female, no rich, no poor, no Jew, no Gentile. So we are all equal. So now, very often, the gospel washes over us.
For the majority of staff members, their position in the South African Council of Churches is an extension of their own personal commitment to serving the community at large. Central to the building up of the church in South Africa is the need for sound theological education. Here, students of the Theological Education by Extension program undergo a preaching examination. This program was launched by the Division of Theological Education at the SACC in 1976 to provide for the training of people unable to obtain formal education.
Please take the mask off me, make me...
In South Africa, more than 50% of the membership of the church is under 16 years of age. There is, therefore, a constant need to look at how the church is relating to youth and to focus on the issues affecting the lives of young people. By working through the issues confronting young people in seminars and discussion groups, the youth desk of the South African Council of Churches strives to create an awareness of these problems and to develop youth leadership. By exploring new forms of expressing the gospel, theology as a meaningful whole is brought to young people in the context of their everyday lives. The Soweto Youth Band. Mission and evangelism, the extension of God's kingdom on earth through the reconciliation of God with man. In working together with God for the reconciliation of mankind, to recover the unity of his creation, the Church brings the gospel to confront and challenge those forces in society which generate conflict, encourage polarization, and offend human dignity. It is the particular responsibility of the Church in an affluent society to concern itself with the plight of those whom Christ called the least of his brethren. The Reverend Arnold Hurst.
But it is a salutary reminder to us, we who live in an affluent society, that our prayers should look into the questions of justice and the causes of the friction, and to take some necessary action, and to do something about it. You know, the people of Jeremiah's day, for example, they were anxious, they were anxious to have peace. All around their borders, there were guerrillas and liberation fighters. Read it. They were very anxious to have peace. They wanted to enjoy the prosperity of their times. And there were lots of preachers around then, just as there are today, to tell them that all was well. Don't worry. Everything's all right. Keep going. But you see, the prophet Jeremiah, he sensed the corruption around him, the injustices, the heartless treatment of the poor and the needy. They have healed the hurt of my people slightly, he said, saying peace, peace, when there is no peace. You see, if we really mean peace, the shalom of God's blessing, we have to listen hard to the divine order of things. Depart from evil and do good. Seek peace and ensue it. To pray for peace, to really pray for peace, involves us in a constant effort to promote the good conditions, the justice, the sympathy, the understanding that are the very content of shalom.
Onverwacht, a seething mass of tarnished tin toilets and shanties, located out of sight, 65 kilometers from Bloemfontein. Swollen with an estimated population of 200,000 people, it is one of the largest resettlement slums in South Africa. With little land available for cultivation and grazing, an erratic water supply from communal taps and tankers, and a bucket toilet system, health hazards abound, and a high incidence of pneumonia and tuberculosis take their toll. Known also as Botshabelo, the place of refuge, Onverwacht comprises those Sotho-speaking people relocated from white farms in the Orange Free State, and the squatter communities relocated from Kromdraai and Makuena. Like a cancer, apartheid spreads its racist creed, dividing not only white from black, but also blacks from one another. With the so-called independence of Bophuthatswana, thousands of Sotho-speaking people living in the Tubantu area were made illegal foreigners overnight. They too were relocated to Onverwacht, the collection point of Sotho-speaking people exiled by apartheid. The South African Council of Churches is totally opposed to the Bantustan policy. At the same time, it does acknowledge that the Church has a continuing responsibility for the pastoral care and physical welfare of those people in the homelands. Reverend Andreas Nkloshwa leads a Sunday morning service at Onverwacht. Out of this human misery, apartheid's final solution for the southern Sotho people emerges. To qualify for residential rights, trading licenses, pensions and school entrance, the inmates of Onverwacht are obliged to take out Kwakwa citizenship, that of the officially designated Bantustan of the South Sotho people. If the apartheid vision is realized, and Kwakwa is accorded so-called independence, even though it is situated 270 kilometers away, Onverwacht will be ceded to the Kwakwa Bantustan, and overnight South Africa will rid itself of more decreed, superfluous appendages. Condemned to the scrap heap of apartheid, the mark of the cross at baptism their only promise of hope for the future, the separate freedom awarded the Bantustans is hardly that of the promised land. It is a negation of the dignity with which God has endowed man in creating him in his own image. The number of freshly dug graves at Onverwacht bear testimony to an average infant mortality rate of 24% in the black rural areas, where people die mainly of diseases related to malnutrition. Where they live a dehumanized existence, to die with the dispossessed anonymity of number 1008C. The final blow in this dehumanizing process, the most vicious component of the apartheid strategy, must surely be the motive underlying the implementation of Bantu education, the deliberate enforcement of a meaningless system of education, inferior in design, resulting in inferior qualifications and opportunities for blacks. A deliberate denial of the fundamental right to equal opportunity. Because the spiritual is central to all that is done by the South African Council of Churches, every morning the staff of Khotso House start their day with worship in the chapel. This is the Lord's Prayer, sung in Xhosa.
Are we agreed then? Mr. Mabam?
The Executive Committee of the South African Council of Churches is made up of representatives of member churches, member organizations and regional councils, as well as the officers of the council.
The way it is presented.
Then you're agreed. Thank you.
I think that in accepting that type of procedure,
This Executive Committee meets 4 times a year and is responsible to the National Conference for the administration of the affairs of the Council.
In other words, the members will have the opportunity to study.
In a coordinated effort, the churches have initiated projects to alleviate the effects of unemployment, to provide a ministry to refugees from South Africa, and to focus on the population relocation issue, and more generally on the erosion of human dignity in South Africa.
An enabling function to aid unemployment surveys and research, and to coordinate...
Bernadette Mosala reports on the progress of the unemployment project.
To train church workers in community action against unemployment and to monitor progress at all levels in order to respond adequately.
During 1982, more than 200,000 black people were arrested for past law offences. More than 12,000 victims of influx control regulations approached the Black Sash Advice Office at Khotso House for help.
I think you should go to legal aid first, and you can take...
This situation can only get worse, as people, deprived of their South African citizenship and shunted into the poverty-stricken homelands, are forced by unemployment and starvation to risk prosecution under the influx control legislation in a desperate bid to feed themselves and their families. The most important part of the Council, concerned with matters of justice and peace in the South African society, is the Division of Justice and Reconciliation. This division has set up study commissions on a wide range of issues, such as racism, relocations, foreign investment, and faith and ideologies, in order to stimulate theological reflection on these and other matters affecting human rights and the restoration of human dignity. The Division of Interchurch Aid is involved with self-help community development schemes designed to help people become more self-reliant. In rural areas like on Verwacht, people are taught to work their small stands producing vegetables. A mobile drill, providing boreholes where required by rural communities, is an ongoing water project. A brickmaking operation has also been established. This prefabricated hall, supplied by Interchurch Aid, functions as a crèche during the week and for general community activity on the weekend. Altogether, Interchurch Aid administers more than 120 projects in agriculture, home industries, health and child care, informal education, general development and culture. In the resettlement areas, attempts at providing education are aggravated by the social trauma of an unfamiliar and hostile environment, the erosion of family security by migratory labor, poverty and malnutrition, and a lack of schools and qualified teachers. Striving to help improve this situation, the African Bursary Fund of the South African Council of Churches is able to provide for the boarding, books and school fees of 2,000 secondary and high school students, and to make available annually 100 university grants. Surrounding Mabatu, the capital of Bophuthatswana, is a chain of resettlement camps. This is Rooigrond, an arid, temporary resettlement camp for 470 people, a far cry from their ancestral home of Mashavistad, located in the fertile maize belt near Potchefstroom. Once a thriving farming community, they were uprooted in 1971 and have now lived in limbo for 12 years, waiting to be moved again. Their disused vehicles, the scattered bones of a herd of cattle once 200 strong, and the rusting remains of farming implements are all visible signs of the despair of this disrupted community. A self-help vegetable garden scheme, initiated on an adjoining plot by SACC agriculturalist Churchill Mutala and regional council field worker Joe Seramane, has revived the spirit of the community, who now administer the scheme with enthusiasm under the name of Do-It-Yourself Barralong Gardens. Interchurch Aid provided the tractor to plough the hard-baked ground, and the community now works to prepare the soil for planting. Animal manure collected from the kraals is used to enrich the soil, and the money for seeds has been raised by the community. To raise the level of self-sufficiency of the community further, a women's poultry project is in the pipeline, but the most pressing need is for a new structure to house the school. This hazardous corrugated iron shack serves as school for children up to Standard 4 and is managed by a dedicated and self-sacrificing lady teacher who depends on what the children can offer as fees for her salary. The South African Council of Churches is partnered by a chain of regional councils established throughout South Africa. Regional Council field worker Joe Seremani presents awards to the relocated community of Micha for their gardening achievements. The work of these regional councils plays an important part in carrying the spiritual and physical relief provided by the churches to outlying areas. This community is located about 30 kilometers from Rooigrond, in the Ramatlabane area adjoining Botswana. Originally a broken and despondent community, their enthusiasm aroused by the gardening project has made this a most successful scheme. In the rural areas, starvation and malnutrition are endemic. The South African Council of Churches, operating in cooperation with regional councils and churches serving in the area, concentrate on the initiating of food-producing projects. The Dependence Conference ministers primarily to the families of political prisoners and detainees. By conducting home visits, working through the regional councils in outlying areas, field workers assess the needs of the dependents, and grants are allocated to help with education and subsistence. Mrs. Sophie Mazabuko is co-director of the Dependence Conference. These visits are an act of caring, to ensure that the families are not forgotten and that their spiritual and material needs are provided for during the absence of the breadwinner.
How sanibona? Yes, awubona. Mayibiyashisa tata.
Zasagcina.
How ngangena?
Ngena.
Impela sivukile.
For Mrs. Betty Mabata, it has been 20 agonizing years since her husband Lombard was taken from their family home by security police and subsequently sentenced in December 1963 to Robben Island.
Everything's all right.
Uzabe qeda 20 years kahle.
Under the constant threat of eviction, she has struggled to raise and educate 2 sons and 3 daughters in this 2-roomed mud hut located in the dismal black township of Everton. Over this period of time, the Dependence Conference has coordinated the writing of letters and facilitated visits by the family to Mr. Mabata on Robben Island. Subsistence grants have helped keep the family alive and to educate the children. With the detention of Lombard Mabata in 1963, his thriving undertaking business, the family's bread and butter, had to be closed down. Nalicia, youngest of the children, speaks to Sophie Mazabuko.
Nelisiwe, how old were you when your father was detained for the first time?
I was 1 year 6 months by that time when he was detained.
What date was this?
It was the 8th of June, 1963.
And you were only 18 months?
Yes.
And when did you see your father for the first time on Robben Island?
I first visited my father in 1978 when I was 18 years old.
Before your father was detained and subsequently tried, what did he do for a living?
He was having a funeral undertaker business. Then when he left for detention, they didn't allow my mother to continue with the business because they say that women are not allowed to have licenses for the business.
And then when did you start schooling?
I started schooling in 1968.
And who paid your fees?
My mother was trying to pay my fees.
how did she make an income?
She was sewing the dresses for the people here in the location.
And how many are you in the family?
We have 5. There are 2 boys and 3 girls.
On their release from prison, people like Lombard Mabata return with no material possessions and very little prospect of finding employment, and in this case, after a 20-year exile on Robben Island, to a 2-roomed mud hut and destitute family in Everton.
Ikakhulu ngabantwana bethu ababoshiweyo. Sicela Nkosi ukuba ubusise umsebenzi we-Dependence Conference.
Went to collect him, this is to welcome him, it was the father and the daughter. They saw Mordecai being in the company of someone they didn't know who was.
Families in crisis situations have particular spiritual and emotional needs, and regular meetings are held with groups of relatives of detainees to provide an opportunity for sharing anxieties and experiences, and for finding out procedures regarding detentions.
Here is a young son whose life is being wasted in prison.
Here, field worker Tom Mantata discusses with families the case of one of their young sons held indefinitely in detention.
Is likely to be dented by this kind of a thing. But we are inclined to sing hallelujah because those who have met him come back with very encouraging news, namely that he is just not scathed. He is just not bothered. In fact, he's more powerful than ever before, which means well to us at Christian level, that is in SACC, because the people under detention, mostly on the basis of their conscience, on the basis of their conviction, on the basis of their Christian concept of human dignity, are kept where they are, be it indefinite. So we would love to keep this spirit intact.
Many political prisoners, having served long sentences on Robben Island, on release are condemned to an indefinite twilight existence, silenced by a banning order, or banished out of sight and mind of society, to a remote corner of a foreign Bantustan.
This is Mr. Petros Nchabeling, originally from Attridgeville Township in Pretoria. He was taken in during the political crisis that ensued in the early 60s, but was subsequently sentenced to 3 years under the Suppression of Communism Act. While he was in prison serving that sentence, he got further charges under the Sabotage Act, and he was sentenced to 8 more years. He served those on Robben Island until 1972. On his release, he was banned and banished to Sekhukhune, this area. On his arrival here, he was just dumped. He had nowhere to stay. He was given 10 pieces of corrugated iron, that was all. And the Dependence Conference, which is a division of the South African Council of Churches, came in with assistance. They augmented on the little that he had to try and buy him some building material. These are the 2 rooms which he has managed to build since.
For Mr. Petrus Nchabaleng, field worker Delisa Machoba provides a vital link to the spiritual and material resources of his human need. To preserve the myths of a fragile apartheid ideology in the name of state security, Mr. Petrus Nchabaleng has been banished to the hostile wilderness of a harsh Sekhukhune land semi-desert. In order that you may not be exposed to his opinion, he's been banned and can thus be neither recorded nor quoted. With strength and dignity, he bears his silent cross. For its commitment to working with God for the reconciliation of mankind and the recovery of the unity of his creation, the South African Council of Churches suffers the wrath of the authorities and that of so-called Christians, who, by paying allegiance to the maintenance of white domination, expediently betray the mandate of Christian witness.
The worst they can do is to destroy the SACC or remove Tutu. But what if they do? Unless a grain of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains alone. Who said death is the worst thing that can happen to a Christian? If God be for us, who can be against us?